being stateless is like being in solitary confinement in the prison, because you are kind of like a shadow within a shadow of people. When you're stateless, there's very little legal recourse. So what does it mean when you're stateless? It means you don't have a country, you don't have a home. There are different reasons why people become stateless. For my reason was because my mother, my birth country, according to their governance and their rules, and their constitution, I had to claim citizenship of the country by the time I was 18. I wouldn't have known that. I was trying to survive and make sure I had a place to sleep.
Born and raised in the motherland, chasing a better life, story of an immigrant. Concrete pastures.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Concrete Pastures. I'm Nancy Mulemwasisi. As you know, being an immigrant has been, oh my God, extraordinary experience of my life. And today I'm so excited to bring on someone I've been wanting to bring on, actually, to learn from. She has so much insight. I heard her story on one of the platforms from my brother, Raphael, white label American. I know I talk about him a lot, but yeah, it's one of the podcasts that I listen to. So I heard her story. I was right away intrigued. I wanted to dive deeper into her story. And as you know, for all of our old listeners, welcome back. And to all the new listeners, you are welcome to the family of your fellow immigrants, your fellow dreamers. This is your space. This is a platform for you to share your story. We inspire each other through our stories. We also give insight on what it's like to be an immigrant anywhere in the world. And part of what we do also is to bring in the topics that are relevant to all of us in the diaspora. And one of those topics today, we're going to touch on our guest story as an immigrant, and also, undocumented community and the type of work that she does around undocumented individuals, and how she also overcome that herself. So let's meet our guest today. Her name is Martine. She's an organizational development expert, author, speaker, DEI consultant, leadership coach, and an elevation strategist. Her commitment to her work comes from her journey as a stateless and undocumented immigrant survivor. Please welcome my sister from the homeland, Africa.
Yes.
Martine. Hi,
Thank
dear.
you, Nancy. Hi.
Sorry.
It's
Oh my God.
a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you are here. I know you are from the motherland. I just want to give our audience a little bit of taste how you came to America. You are now in America. And
Yes.
just give us a taste of how you came here and,
Yeah,
share your journey.
I have been in the US for over 30 years. I came when I was 4 years old. I was born in Zambia and South Central Africa, or Central Africa. However, my mother and my biological father were from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so DRC, formerly known as Zaire.
Yay.
So I came to the US. My mother and I left Zambia when I was very young, so I don't really remember. We moved to Congo, where her family was, for maybe a year, and then immigrated to the US, where the rest of her siblings. So she was from a family of nine, and she was the oldest. And her siblings, 5 of them were already in the United States pursuing this American dream. And so they brought her over, and my mother had 7 kids. I was her youngest, the 7th. So because I was so little, of course it made sense for her to bring me along immediately.
Wow. So where did you guys live in the US when you finally came to the US?
Yeah, we lived in, I feel like it's the heart of immigrants in Silver Spring, Maryland. It's consistently been an immigrant community, which I love. So we lived in Maryland, not too far from Washington, D.C. So and I lived there for until I was probably 12, 13. My mother did remarry my stepfather when I was maybe 7 years old. And so it was just a pretty normal, happy childhood. And things started to change when I was around 13. You know, my stepfather became ill. We moved to Columbus, Ohio to be closer to his family so that, you know, he could get extra support and care. And, you know, by the time I was 13 and a half, my stepfather passed away, and he was,
Sorry about that.
you know, oh, thank you. He, you know, he was such a prominent figure in my life, and just someone I regarded so highly. And he was my father for all intents and purposes. He was my dad.
Yeah.
And so he passed away, and he was American, American born. And about a year and a half later, my mom passed away. So she became really ill, and she passed away. I was her caretaker. So by the time I was 15, I'd lost basically my footing in the world, my grounding, my mom and dad. And yeah, so then, you know, I moved around a lot. Certainly I can go on and on, which is why I wrote a book about it, but I want to be mindful of your time. But I ended up moving from Columbus to Boston, Massachusetts, you know, then, you know, to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I went to prep school, and then eventually went to college in upstate New York. And then I was a New Yorker, lived in New York City for about 13 years. And now I'm back in the DC area.
Wow, my God.
Yeah.
Listen, what a story. And dealing with tragedy. It's as an immigrant and at a young age, dealing with the loss of your parents. I cannot imagine going through that, and then going from state to state to state. During that time, I think reading from and listening from your story, is that when you became stateless or you became undocumented?
Yeah. Well, I mean, both. You know, I think people ask what's the difference between being stateless, being undocumented. I'm part of United Stateless, which is an amazing organization, really focused on supporting and, you know, developing rights and policies for stateless people. But one of the founders puts it so eloquently and said, you know, if being undocumented is like being in prison, being stateless is like being in solitary confinement in the prison, because you are kind of like a shadow within a shadow of people. When you're stateless, there's very little legal recourse. So what does it mean when you're stateless? It means you don't have a country, you don't have a home. There are different reasons why people become stateless. For my, you know, my reason was because my mother, my birth country, according to their governance and their rules, and their constitution, I had to claim citizenship of the country by the time I was 18. I wouldn't have known that. I was trying to survive and make sure I had a place to sleep. And my mother and father, biological father's birth country, Congo, first of all, it changed its government. It went from Zaire to DRC, Congo. And also I would have had to file for citizenship at a certain age, right? And I didn't have any proof of my parents being Congolese citizens because my mother was deceased. My biological father, I thought, was deceased for most of my life. Turned out that he's not deceased. So that's how I became stateless. So when I became undocumented, I also became stateless. So I became undocumented probably when shortly after my mom died. I learned later on that I had a very small window of time to adjust and file for my own status. Now, let's just think about this. A 15-year-old who has no home.
I'm shaking my head.
How would they even know? I didn't know. I grew up as an American. I grew up going to, you know, U.S. school system. I didn't know. This is not something that my mom brought up. She, you know, she was ignorant about this stuff, right? Her focus was, now that I have my one daughter here, let me bring my other children who are suffering and struggling in Congo. Let's not remember that Congo has been through a 30-year civil war. Let me bring my other children here. This was her focus. And she was applying for US citizenship. Actually, I was helping her to prepare for her exam when she passed away. So that's when I became undocumented. I fell out of status, but I didn't even know it. And at that time, that's probably around the same time that I became stateless or shortly thereafter. But there's no way that a person would know that. And, you know, people ask, well, how did you, or I think the misconception is, you know, did you, you know, come here illegally? No. First of all, I don't condone, I don't judge anyone for coming, however they decide to enter and go into different parts of the world, because
100%.
a lot of people are being displaced these days, right? Like for different reasons, whether it's climate change, war, people are being displaced. So when people immigrate or go somewhere else, it's for a better life, better opportunity. And sometimes it's just for mere survival, right?
Yep.
So I just say that because I don't, you know, my family coming legally does not make us any better or worse than someone else that migrated illegally or what have you. That's not my place to make that judgment. I don't feel that that's right for me to do that. But the misconception that people have is that most undocumented immigrants are, you know, come in illegally. Actually, that's untrue. That's a myth. Majority of undocumented immigrants come in on a visa, and they overstay their visa for one reason or another. I don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but that is the majority of that population of undocumented immigrants. So it could be anyone who comes from Europe, somewhere in Africa, somewhere in Asia, right? They come over and for some reason or another, they overstay their visa. So that's what happened. My mother and I came on my mother's passport. She came to the US. She had a visa for a certain period of time, whether it was a year. I mean, we're talking 1984, 1985. She overstayed that visa. However, she then became, she didn't overstay her visa because she got a green card. She applied for a green card and then eventually started applying for US citizenship. But because I was attached to her and there were no efforts through her own ignorance of, you know, changing my status, I overstayed my visa, right? Because I was on my mother's passport.
Yeah. Her priorities were different because her priorities was for all of us, especially Africans, we are aware of what has happened in Congo, and I don't fault her for any reason.
Yeah, I always say that, you know, because in the immigration system, this complicated ecosystem, in order to justify a person staying and being undocumented, there's got to be someone to blame, right? The courts almost positions it in a way where if it's a child who's undocumented minor, they're forced to say, oh, it was my mom's fault, it's my dad's fault, because, right, like that's how it's set up. And it's so destructive mentally, emotionally. It's just absolutely destructive. But that's exactly, you know, how it was positioned. My mom was at fault. Yes, it was her fault, but it's always important to create context around it. Okay. My mom, you know, and I'm not justifying, but she barely spoke English, right? It's a lot harder to learn a language when you are an adult. She struggled with the English language. She probably didn't know how to navigate immigration law. The average person doesn't know how to navigate immigration law. I could barely navigate immigration law. I'm not a lawyer. So she wouldn't have known. And in her ignorance, she just kept thinking, let me save my children, right? Any mother, right, is going to think that. My one child is here next to me, safe.
Yeah.
But I need to get my other kids here.
That are next. Yeah. Next.
That was her priority.
Who's next? I would be the same. I think that would be the same mentality for any parent that comes, and even for relatives that do come. there's so many people who have like massive migration, and they come, one person comes and then they start to pull everybody else.
Yeah.
But there's priorities. And in this case, it's just unfortunate how things happened in the way that
Yeah.
they happened. But in a way, even though it was unfortunate, you are able to sit here and tell your story to teach
Yes.
us some of the things that we are unaware of. Because a lot of people, when they hear undocumented, it's not people who overstay their visas. It's just somebody who shows up illegally, I guess, in the country with no documents.
Well, they hear and see videos that the media perpetuate of, you know, migrant workers, and the media is really great at creating fear, right? Like kind of really triggering us is the word. The media, that's what they do. Like they're supposed to be salacious, they're supposed to trigger. So they position the immigrant as two images, this superhuman. So this is the person that's so smart, they're so brilliant, or at the highest of their class. They deserve to go to Harvard, and if anyone else is not as good, right? Like if you're not there, then you don't deserve to be in America. So that's the superhuman immigrant, which I cannot be. I never was. I wish I could. I was like that smart, but I'm not. And then there's the subhuman, the person that's a menace to society, that's going to hurt you and hurt your children and all of these things, right? So these are the two dichotomies. And then the truth is the majority of us sit right in the middle. And then these images are perpetuated, and we don't know, like, we're not really clear on what we see. This is we, the general we. There's no context. Immigration is so convoluted. I don't think the average person really understands the difference between a refugee, asylum seeker, undocumented immigrant, a stateless person, right? It's not always that easy. And I don't expect people to understand all of the different nuances, but at the very least, give somebody the benefit of the doubt that no one would choose these circumstances. Like no one would say, oh, I want to go to the US and I want to suffer and be an undocumented immigrant and have to, like, not have a my quality of life is not that great. And, I'm perceived as a menace to society. Like no one chooses that. There's no reason a person would choose that. So at least the very least we can do is assume, like, ask the question, what was the person's circumstances that led them to their situation? I think that's the best place to start for any of us before we make any judgment.
I completely agree. So Martine, you go through, but well explained, honestly. So you go through the undocumented situation, and you're stateless at this point. How did you come out of it?
Yeah, that's a very long, but I'll try to abbreviate it. Before I go into that, I did want to give another example of statelessness, if that's all right, because I do
this is your space.
It's important for people to really understand. So, I think a year ago, a lot of us saw images in the US media, right? I can't assume that this audience is just US based, but in the US media of Haitian migrants, right? And these images were so visceral of, them being whipped at the border by, Border Patrol and horses. And I did hear, rumblings of people saying, well, why don't they just go back? Like, why would they take that trip here? Well, little do most of us know that the majority of those people were probably stateless, meaning that they had no country. That's why they were fleeing, because majority of those people are from Dominican Republic, right? So the Dominican, there are a lot of Haitian Dominicans. This is another way that a person can become stateless. So imagine, Nancy, your ethnicity is Haitian, but you were born in the Dominican Republic. So you would think you're Dominican, right? Like, what country are you from? You're Dominican. And maybe your mother was born in Dominican Republic. Well, the Dominican Republic recently instated very racist laws saying, because they want to get rid of the Black people in Dominican Republic, saying, if you're Dominican Haitian, predating back to 1940 something, I don't remember the exact year, you're no longer a citizen of Dominican Republic, right? So that means, Nancy, you were born in Dominican Republic, your mother was born in Dominican Republic, but now you're no longer citizens of the Dominican Republic, because Dominican Republic is saying, go back to where you come from. Well, you come from Dominican Republic. So now, how do you go back to Haiti? You're not a Haiti citizen. You're not a citizen in Haiti. So Haiti's not going to say, oh yeah, just come on back, because you're not from there. You're from Dominican Republic. So that is what the majority of those individuals were fleeing. They have nowhere to go. And so when we don't contextualize these things, it's hard for us to understand. So that's why I just, my suggestion is always ask, like, what's the backstory? Why would someone go to such lengths? And as a stateless person, you have very little legal recourse. There are no laws written for you anywhere in the world, right? They're lawyers, immigration lawyers themselves don't know how to navigate statelessness, because sometimes it depends on like the rules of sovereignty across different nations. There are no laws written. There is, if you are a victim of violence or anything in a particular country, when you're stateless, you can't really navigate. You don't have any legal recourse. So it's really, stateless people, the UN, according to UNHCR, about every 10 minutes a stateless child is born, right? Because if you're an ethnic minority, if there's a war and the country changes, governance, like there are lots of ways that people become stateless. And there are over 200,000 stateless people in the US, and probably more, but there are over 12 million in the world. And that number is just increasing. And when you talk about like human trafficking, stateless people are at the highest percentage of likelihood of being trafficked, because there's no recourse, right? So I like to emphasize that, because so that we understand context, right? We understand the picture a little bit more. We understand why anyone would go through such great lengths to try to flee, because it's for freedom. It's for something. Yeah. That's why people do what they do. I'm not justifying it. I just need to explain it a little bit more. So that's just another example of how a person can become stateless.
The thing is, with what was happening last year and all the news, they were not, I appreciate you for sharing the backstory, because nobody was sharing the backstory. Everything was just like, oh, where are they coming? And we are watching everything happening as to why are they fleeing Haiti. It's not even, nobody was mentioning Dominican Republic, at least. Like very little was mentioned about Dominican Republic. It was really, Haitians are coming to the United States. Why are we not letting them in? Or why are they here? What's happening? Yeah. But nobody had a backstory. So just like you were saying, that they like to scare us, they like to give us whatever makes the news, hype us up, and
also perpetuate the story of the again, that sub
the picture
human and demonized, right? So it's easier, it fits into the narrative when you don't explain all this other stuff. You don't explain why, but you're just saying, hey, look at all these people, look at these Black people. Like, let's just be honest, look at these Black people that are trying to enter. And it's just interesting to see the juxtaposition of how, historically, immigrants who are Black or people of color have been portrayed versus white immigrants, right? From like the Ukraine, right? It's just, that's also a whole nother conversation. But I do want to also answer your question of, how did I navigate and become a US citizen from the point of being stateless and undocumented? I would say that my life is, I don't want to say that I'm lucky, because to be lucky, I think that's an overstatement, because otherwise I'm the luckiest unlucky person, right? And I've actually had friends who said that, right? For someone to lose my parents, lose my mother and father, watch them die of AIDS, be their caretaker in the midst of that, I would never wish that on anybody's life, and not even have the chance to actually understand it, mourn it as a child, and then trying to, being moved from one home to another, relatives, and dealing with abuse. Like this was my reality. And it felt very bleak for many, many years. It felt very hopeless. In terms of my mental health, I mean, I was suicidal because I just felt like, I always believe that if you work hard and you're taught, if you work hard, you study, you do well, you're going to get far. And here was the reality where I was working so hard. I was getting good grades. I was a good kid. And just, it seemed like life, everything was against me. I was losing everything that I loved. And I was displaced, right? So this whole notion of statelessness, immigration, it never even was part of my thinking until much later. I was just trying to find a home, people who love me, who wouldn't abuse me and hurt me. That was my reality. When I ended up after being tossed from home to home, different aunts, uncles, just kind of going from one home to another for a course of a year and a half, I ended up moving to Maryland with my other aunt, who was, she was just pure evil. And she decided to take me out of school at 16 because she wanted me to work. I mean, that's breaking every child labor law in a very dangerous environment and neighborhood. She owned a consignment store. So she just decided I wasn't going to go to school anymore and I would work in her store. Yeah. And by the grace of, higher power, the universe, God, whatever, fits, your belief system, this beautiful, wonderful woman, Jamaican woman, walked in. I remember her. She had red hair and freckles, and asked me one so important question that literally changed my entire life. But in that moment, the power of one question, but in that moment, I didn't even understand it, right? It was just, I couldn't see past my own pain and hurt to see, and I didn't even believe that there was anyone out there who cared for me. I think at that point, I just felt hopeless. I felt like there's no one, this is it. I'm going to end up, I don't know what it was just very bleak. She asked me this one question: have you ever thought about going to boarding school? And I'm like, what is she talking about? Who was this person? Doesn't even know me. I have no idea. All I can say is that she was like an angel. She probably sort of assessed the situation as an adult would and wondered, why is it this child, she looks like a child, working in this store in this neighborhood in the middle of the day by herself behind a cash register? And maybe then figured she would make conversation. I wasn't a conversationalist at that time. I just had nothing to say. And I said no. And then that was it. I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want my aunt to think I was defying her in any way. And this woman left. She came back a few days later and, befriended my aunt, is what I thought. And in my mind, I was like, see, I knew her. I knew she didn't care. I knew she was a traitor. She can't see past my aunt's evilness. How could she not see it? But little did I know that she sort of manipulated the situation to get me out. And then it just seemed like from her, I was put in another space with strong Black women who were affiliated with, private schools. They helped me get into private school. And by the time I got into private school, I had a benefactor I didn't know was paying my way through private school. I had no idea how I was there because there wasn't any more scholarship money. And then through the school, they noticed the abuse that my aunt was inflicting on me. And they said they could not let me go back. That would just, so I stayed, and then I ended up going to college. And that's when my status became a question. That's when it just became apparent to me, not having papers, what that really meant. Cause I heard that throughout, like when I was in high school, we were trying to open a bank account for me. And it was like, well, we don't know what her status is. This is back in 1999, right? Yeah. So we don't know what her status was. So it didn't seem like threatening. It was just like, oh, okay, I don't know. My status is, I guess we need to just sign a piece of paper to adjust it. Like that's how it felt in my mind. And by the time I got to college is when things started to change. I got a private scholarship to go to college, but I needed to work to just kind of supplement my, day-to-day income. Was going to work for the Dean of Faculty's office at Hamilton College in upstate New York. And, through the ignorance of both me and a college administrator, we decided to go and adjust my Social Security card because, what most people don't know is anyone who, if you enter the US, and I think at that time, if you had a visa for a certain period of time, you got a Social Security card, it said non-working on it. So it always said the same Social Security card I got in 1981 or 84 when I came to the US, the same number I have today. So and I always paid my taxes. Ironically, even though I didn't know what my status was, I always paid money. So that's the other misconception that people have. There are a lot of undocumented persons that are paying taxes because they feel like they need to, and they're trying to be right on top of just paying those fee applications that they don't get back if they're denied their application for DACA or whatever else. And just, wanting to dispel a few rumors along the way. So, we went to adjust my Social Security card. I went to the Social Security Administration. I was placed in removal proceedings. That's a euphemism for deportation proceedings. In that moment, like literally, I was put in the system and boom, like my fate was set. And to make matters worse, I was directed to the Buffalo court system. And the judge that I wasn't disbarred, right? And that's a whole nother issue. And with immigration, but this judge had such a bad reputation in the Miami immigration court system that he was asked to leave and ended up in Buffalo just to add to rain terror to other group of people. Wow. So he just didn't like me at all. He just, I was terrified of him. He terrorized me. He would say things like, you don't deserve to be here. You deserve to go back, to be sent back, just horrible things. And I had a pro bono attorney. And, I think the other, I'm sort of kind of giving context to one, anyone who's going through this, I think they'll understand it.
Because I also want to ask about the pro bono attorney.
Yeah, I went through 6 attorneys in my, 7.5 years of going through this, 6 different attorneys, because, attorneys, they hear my story and say, just get married. Like, like it's the Hollywood movie. I think anyone who's ever been, who's ever dealt with immigration situation, I'm sure that they have the first thing anyone has ever told them, or the second thing or third thing is just get married. Like, 1, it's guaranteed. 1, it's not guaranteed. 2, it's actually very, very hard, right? To do that. Like there's an investigator who's, you don't just get married and then tomorrow you become a US citizen. That doesn't work that way. Yeah. It's like you're investigated for 3 years. They ask, your partner's family and friends and all that. They ask them questions, they interview them. I mean, it's not a glamorous Hollywood movie. It's not like the movie The Terminal with Tom Hanks. It's none of that. It's real life where people are really scared for their life. And if you make one false move, it could actually jeopardize whatever is already, a precarious situation. Yeah. It can make it worse. So it's very risky to just get married when you're not in love. If you have no intention of marrying someone, to just marry, it's risky. Now, I'm not saying it hasn't worked for people, but it's very, very risky. So anyhow, those are the comments I was getting from lawyers. Got this pro bono attorney, and lawyers, immigration lawyers don't all specialize in removal. That's the other thing. Like, not all immigration lawyers are alike. So it's almost like you're not going to go to, if you need neurosurgery, you go to a neurosurgeon. You don't go to a neurologist. They're not going to know how to operate your brain. A neurosurgeon's going to know. So going to an immigration attorney when you're in removal proceedings is not going to necessarily be the right person. You need to go to someone who specializes in removal cases, right? So these are things that you start to learn along the way, maybe or maybe not. And so I just share that because some of us, you know, I mentor people who are like, I haven't heard back from my lawyer. I don't know what's going on. It's like, well, first of all, are they is that the right person? Do they know what they're doing? Do they understand removal proceedings? So anyhow, they're also, the other thing is immigration attorneys are inundated with cases, right? I mean, they might have like 20 to 30 other clients, and they're underpaid. They're massively underpaid. This is a very depressing kind of work. I mean, it takes a long time, and they prioritize based on who's literally going into detention right now, who's being deported tomorrow, right? That's how they prioritize, which makes sense. But that means if you're not being deported tomorrow and you're not like paying your lawyer all this money and you have a pro bono attorney, you're not going to be the highest priority, right? And then they're severely underpaid. So on top of that, right, they can't get the support that they need, the team to you know, just to stay organized. It's so easy for them to, I don't want to say generalize and say all of them, but my immigration attorney, you know, I could have probably in the end sued him for malpractice, because the way he presented my case, I was told like during my trial, the case was misrepresented, the way that he presented it. So anyway, to make the long story short, your question was, how did I go from being, you know, in my situation, stateless and undocumented, to where I am? For 7 years, it was me going back and forth to court, you know, having to figure out how to get to the court in Buffalo, because I couldn't get a driver's license because I was undocumented and stateless. So I didn't have any form of ID except my college ID. And so how would I actually get there, you know, get to, you know, Buffalo? I couldn't, you know, this was around 9/11, post 9/11, where, you know, there are a lot of raids, immigration raids, and like the bus, like Greyhound buses on, you know, air, you know, you had to be careful flying. So I couldn't take those risks, right? Because the irony was, if I took those risks and you know, I was arrested, I would be placed in detention facility, even though I was trying to go to an immigration court to fight for not be, you know, detained. This is the irony and the catch-22 of immigration. There's a great show on Netflix. It's called Mo, and it's Muhammad, I forgot his last name. He talks about his story of being a Palestinian you know, refugee or asylum seeker in the US. He was stateless, and
Can you show that just came out?
Yeah, it's
I'm watching it today. I'm watching
brilliantly done, because it takes what is so tragic. Like, you see all of this catch-22, but then he invokes so much humor in it. It's just brilliant the way it's done. I mean, I just really commend him for that, because it's so hard to take tragedy and make people laugh, but also explain it. And he does it so eloquently. So anyone who wants to understand statelessness a little bit more, the juxtaposition of things, the catch-22, watch it. You know, it's not bad. So anyhow, this immigration judge, was on a vendetta crusade, basically to annihilate me, I felt. And he thought I made a mockery of his courtroom because of the way that my attorney presented the case, right? He presented new evidence in the 11th hour. You know, and in my book, I get into the details of that. So the judge really thought that, you know, it wasn't the lawyer's fault, it was me, right? I was blamed. And so for 7 years, it was going back and forth to court. And in those 7 years, I also had to survive. I had to find a way to just live. What was I gonna do? So you know, after college, it was a matter of, how do I survive? And my mother's last words, swear on my life, last words to me before I left, you know, Boston, and she then died shortly after, was, stay in school will save you. And literally it was almost like it was a prophecy. So I just felt like, if I just stay in school, it will save me. Like, it will be my home. This is where I'm going to sleep. This is where I'm going to find food. This is where I'm going to get my education to help myself. So I had to find a way to get to grad school. I didn't know how. Like, how do I get to grad school when I can't get federal funding how do I go to graduate school? But I find that, I've been told that I do pretty well with my interviews, and I have a compelling story, and the way I present it is compelling. So I found a way to took my GREs, went to a couple of interviews of college, university campuses, and, Syracuse University, the Maxwell School decided to, invest in me, and invested in, gave me a full a grant of, this private money of like $70,000. And that's how I went to grad school, right? And that's where I decided to take immigration law courses, human rights law, to understand my case, my story a little bit more. And then from there, I became my own advocate. I started to not just rely on my lawyer, but I started to advocate for myself. And so fast forward, my sixth attorney decided, we've got to go public with your story. My first public appearance was for this late Senator John McCain's rally on immigration in New York. Then I just became very public with my story. I spoke on, Capitol Hill on a panel on behalf of the DREAM Act. Nice. And then my case was sent to the Board of Immigration Appeals twice. The second time, they did something that I'm told is seldom done. I mean, because the backlog, the inefficiency with, the BIA, they went through my file. They read it. They responded, and they said, this woman has been through enough. And they literally listed all of the things I had been through. And they said, we are remanding the case back to this immigration judge. And so he can, and we're basically demanding that he, provide or give or grant her permanent resident status. So that was the most powerful thing that they could do. So the immigration judge's hands were tied. He had no choice but to grant me my permanent resident status. So I got my permanent residency like maybe 4 months later. And so that's what happened. But, I've been told that that's like one in 500, people have that situation, that outcome. That doesn't happen, So, and I realized that that's the privilege that I was granted. There's no prescription in immigration. It's not like if a person does exactly what I do, they follow my process, they're going to have the same outcome. That's the unfortunate thing. There's no process. The system of immigration, like many other systems, were designed for people to fail. You're not supposed to come out of it. You're supposed to just fail in it and then give up. That's the whole point of it. But I didn't.
Martine, I have chills all over me. Your story is so touching because me being an immigrant, I know what it takes to deal with immigration. I completely know. And the weight, the stress out of it, the emotion, I cannot imagine what was going on through your head. Talk about the emotions. Have you had a chance to talk to even someone professional?
I've been in therapy all my life. So, I mean, like I said, the emotion of grieving my parents was, that's hard enough. I mean, watching someone die, watching your parents die, being their caretaker, watching them die of AIDS, like that is hard. I would never wish that on my worst enemy. Like that was hard enough. And then on top of that, that displacement. And then on top of that, the abuse, by different family. And then on top of that, like then the immigration. So yes, I've been in therapy all my life. I thank therapy. I'm grateful that therapy is there. The mental health component. Yes. By the time the immigration stuff showed up, it was compounding. It was like all of this stuff, right? From my mother, my stepfather dying, all this stuff. Now this,
they hit you.
It was just too much. And the thing is, the idea of being a nobody was so apparent to me because I had a judge telling me I was nobody. I had an immigration judge who said, you are nothing, you're nobody, right? This is how he spoke to people who went into his courtroom.
I can't.
So then how could I justify?
Like, how do you talk that way to people? Just
how
because
could I
of your title? Like how?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is this is the immigration system, right? It's not part of the judicial system. It's under the executive branch. So there isn't a jury in there that can go, oh my gosh, like, so the judge, depending, I mean, there's some immigration judges out there, but a lot of them are given quotas. They have to get through at least 100, 1,000 cases in a given year. They're given a quota. There's a lot of pressure for them too. So they don't have the ability to, have like the judicial freedom to really think through cases like they would, like a judge should, right? Because they have quotas. They have to get through a certain number of people. That's a lot of pressure. So I'm not condoning anyone. I think that everyone in this ecosystem needs some sort of support. There need to be policies that need to be enacted to change things, from the immigration judge to the immigration lawyers. I think immigration lawyers should have therapists. A therapist should be educated on immigration, because, the reason I had an amazing therapist after, like, I used to go to therapy and the therapist knew nothing about immigration. So it was like, oh gosh, now I have to explain my case. And it was frustrating. Yeah. But when I finally got the right therapist, she was a forensic psychologist. She knew about immigration. She worked with other immigrants. She had to testify or, whatever in immigration hearings. So she knew already. And I cannot tell you what a relief, what a weight is lifted off when you go to a therapy session and you say, I'm terrified for my life that I have to go to court in 2 days. Yeah. And a therapist goes, I can only imagine. I understand. And I've been in those rooms. It's terrifying. It's like a weight being lifted off, as opposed to a therapist going, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by immigration? Yeah. So in terms of my mental health, by the time I was going through this immigration stuff, and then on top of that, let's compound 9/11, and anyone who's an immigrant has a negative association, right? We were all demonized. Terrorists here, terrorists there. And so I was already like fearful of, am I going to end up in Guantanamo Bay where they send terrorists? I mean, this was really my fear. Like, this is the fear. Am I going to end up in detention facility? So I had these fears. That was part of the mental health. The other was, I can't tell people because I don't know who to trust. Didn't really have like strong friendships. I was friendly because that's what I do. I know that's how I survive. Like, I know how to build relationships, but I could never know if I could really trust anyone with this information, right? And then also you have to balance being the girl next door, because if you're downtrodden, nobody wants to help to people who are attractive, who are put together, who are calm, right? And when you're a Black woman, you can't be angry, right? Because this is a trope. You have to be sweet. You have to be like, and so this was all, I was fully aware of all of this, the social dynamics, even though I was too young to really put it into words. I understood that this part of it is I have to don this mask so I could protect myself, so I can navigate this whole thing. But it was heavy. When I came home, it was like, take off that mask, this, my armor. And I just felt weak, just broken, tired. So, like I said, I went through suicidal ideation a lot, and anyone who even has an inkling of a thought of ending their life, absolutely seek help immediately, because it just can go deeper and deeper. And so to me, I felt like, well, I'm a nobody because a judge is telling me I'm a nobody. And, the way that we define ourselves is through our citizenship of something. We are part of a country. Yeah. I don't have that. And the other way we define ourselves is through our family, familial connection. I don't have that. So I guess I am a nobody. And that's literally the belief I started to carry with me. Like, I am nothing, I'm worthless. And it was so heavy. And I and then it's so hard because you can't tell anyone that. So you have to pretend that you're so put together. That's a lot, for a 20-year-old, 18-year-old to have to carry. And on top of that, it's like, I have to get really good grades, right? I have to sort of try to be superhuman so
Yeah.
that I can like survive. It's very heavy. It's very heavy. And I am one of the more fortunate ones and privileged ones, because not everyone has access to the private school education that I have, right? That I had. Not everyone has those opportunities. So I'm thankful that when those opportunities showed up, I did something with them. Because that's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
You can be so broken that you may not even see the opportunity. And I again, I don't condemn anyone for that, right? It's not my place to judge, because the mental health piece is it's so heavy, and this immigration can break you. It can literally break you. And I came so close to breaking so many times. And what the reason I didn't break is not because I'm a strong woman. No, I mean, to me, I say that there's weakness and strength. I mean, there were many times where I like couldn't do it. But I did, even though my friends didn't always understand or know all the details of what was going on. I did have a few people who at least pulled me up. So it was my small community that lifted me up each day, quite honestly. So that was the mental health component of it. It was just the anxiety and the fear of going to court because I knew when I went to court, first of all, you need ID to go into an immigration court. I don't have ID. So when I get there, are they going to turn me away because I don't have ID to go to my my hearing? There are master calendar hearings that they call them. If you show up to your master calendar hearing and your lawyer didn't adjust your address, which happened to me before, I would give, I went from college to graduate school, my home address changed. I informed my lawyer. He was disorganized, didn't adjust that in the court, in the paperwork. So went to the hearing. The judge said, first question or second question is like, what's your address? You state it. And he goes, well, that's not here. And blows a gasket, right? Is like, court is dismissed. Come back in a month. And you're like, come back in a month. Do you know how much money I have to find to come back in a month? Do you know that I have to ask somebody to drive me here? Like, I can't just come back in a month. It was just so much anxiety, so much stress that would build up, and it just was never ending for like 7 years. You're just court hearing, case, master calendar hearing, a trial date. Okay, I have to prepare. All right. It was a lot. But for some people, they're going through this for much longer. 7 years it's on the lighter side. I used to think it was heavy, but I have friends, I've known people who've been undocumented for 20 plus years. I know people who've been stateless for 30 years, so I recognize my privilege at the same time. And that's why I feel that I have to, go back in the fire. I can't just turn away now that I'm a US citizen and say, okay, well, my life is better. Let me just move forward. No, that's not how we, honor our stories. We honor our stories in the community, our communities, by going back into the fire, however way we can.
Listen, I asked about the stress because I went through my own stress, but I cannot compare to your story. Even to the point where I went to get my citizenship. I mean, I was not showing the stress, but I was super scared. Like every step of the journey of getting your
Every step.
paperwork, there is that stress. It's just like, oh, what's going to happen today? Like, mind you, I started the 100 questions that's required for us to get the citizenship. So I'm sitting there, and then questions they ask me, oh, you went, where have you traveled? I'm like, okay, I named the few that I knew. And then, oh, in 2012, you on August 1st, you went somewhere. I'm like, wait, that's close to my birthday. I don't remember. Why did I go? My heart is going like this the whole time. Like, I'm like, okay, if I fail this, what's going to happen? I'm not going to get my citizenship. I'm not. The whole time there's like so much anxiety. And then
So much.
I remember I was like, oh, okay, we went to Canada. It was my birthday weekend. We went, and I remember, and then coming back like every day. I don't understand who keeps track of all of the places. I didn't even know they had that, of all the places you travel to outside the country, and you had to remember all of the dates that you had traveled. Um, but it was stressful. But I cannot imagine being in your shoes. Your
Well,
story is super powerful, and a
thank
lot of the
you.
times when we go through something, it is for us, but also for us to share in the way that you've shared it. There's so many people that are going to relate to your story, that I relate to it. And oh my God, I can't.
You said something about, you know, kind of holding it together. And I think that's just, there are two things you highlighted, and I just want to,
Yeah.
you know, piggyback off because I think they're so profound. One is that when you're going through any kind of immigration situation, you have to be contained. Like you're like, it's like, it's like shaking up a soda bottle, but then like you don't open the top. You have to be contained,
It doesn't.
right? But you inside, you're like, you want to explode.
Yep.
You have to be so contained. And that is like mentally, it's so hard. And then the second thing that I think is so important that you know, I want to just stress that you mention is your life is at the hands of the person that's sitting across from you or sitting across from that computer screen, which is so scary, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, even if there's a structure, there's a system, there's a process, really, who determines whether you become permanent residents, whether if you had an immigration case, you were in removal proceedings, it all falls in the hands of one person, whether it's an immigration judge or the clerk who's when you're applying for I used to go and get my work authorization card every 90 days. I didn't know if I was going to get it this 90 days. Was I going to get it the next 90 days? It depended on who was standing across from me, right? Behind that glass. If they liked me, if I said something and my tone didn't make them happy. And I had to be contained the whole time. They could be rude. They could talk down to me, because that's the other thing. It's you know, it's about kind of almost like making you feel like you don't have dignity, like you lose your dignity, or it's easy for your dignity to be challenged. And it's so degrading.
Yeah.
But you, as the person, you can't show that. You have to, because you need that. It's almost like you're a beggar. Somebody's degrading you, but you have to just be contained. That is so hard. And it's so heavy. And I totally get that. And I think if there's one thing that any person who's gone through any kind of immigration, not even just immigration, dealing with social like these social systems, whether it's welfare, whether it's, you know, whatever it is in the US or in the globe, like these policies and systems,
Yeah.
It's that, right? Feeling like you're being degraded, having to contain yourself,
Yeah.
because you need that person's approval. You need that person to help you, and they can do whatever they want. They have the power, and it depends on whether you get a good person or not. And I'm going to, you know, just add this one story, because I also, when you were telling me about your citizenship experience, I can tell you, I went through the same thing. So, you know, you would think as a permanent resident, it was, you know, things were easy and then I can get a US citizenship. No. Especially, I think, you know, because I was stateless, when you go to get your US citizenship, you apply, and, you know, whoever's overseeing your case, they ask you a bunch of questions, right? You get the test, all that, but then they ask you to, you know, provide your passport for your existing country, your native country and all that. So that fear, and my lawyer prepared me and said, it just depends. We have to hope that the person who's interviewing you doesn't get frustrated and denies you because you don't have a passport for any other country. If they don't understand statelessness, or they don't get it, or it annoys them, they could just deny you of your citizenship. And so I remember being so scared. I did my written test, I did my oral test, and literally just sitting there, and the guy's just typing away, typing, and and takes a stamp, because that's what they do when, if they're going to approve it or deny it, they take a stamp. You don't know which one, hits the stamp. And I literally felt like tears were going to run down, because I just like, oh my God, he denied it. Like, that's my initial thought, because that was the experience. I just felt like I'd gone through so many denials. And he said, you've been through a lot you've been through a lot, haven't you? And the compassion I saw in his eyes, just, it was like, wow, it was so palpable. And he said, you've been approved. I literally wanted to jump over the desk and hug him.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think he wasn't allowed to crack a smile, because he had to stay, but you could tell that, he went home that day feeling like he did something right.
Yeah.
And, but again, it doesn't always happen. And he could have just as easily stamped it denied.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for people to understand and get that this is it. This is the life of, and I don't think we're looking for sympathy or pity. And nobody's looking for that. It's just
no, not
understand,
even.
at least be open to understanding our stories.
Yeah.
Right.
It's far from it, because even the way I used to like dress, I love to dress up. I know,
Yeah,
we're like, but when you go to this immigration thing, they tell you to dress a certain way. My lawyer would tell me, no, don't be show it too much. I'm like, okay, so we gotta show that we're actually suffering through this.
Yes.
Like, even when you are suffering,
you know what?
but your clothes, the thing is, with clothes, it makes you feel better.
Your armor. It's your armor. Yes.
Yes. So
yes.
when you go in there and you just like, okay, you gotta show that you actually suffering through this process, which you are, but you don't necessarily want to show it through your clothes. And
isn't that so strange and sick, just disturbing? And that there's these dichotomies. You can't be both. You can't be attractive and being suffering. Like, if you look put together, it means you don't have a care in the world. You don't have any problems. Right. But, and if you are downtrodden and you look like you're broken, then, that's going to evoke more sympathy. I think that's just, I don't know, like, that's like the human condition. It's so problematic. But I remember really struggling with, as African or Congolese, I just know it's like your armor, your clothes are your armor, like, if anyone's ever heard of the Sapeur of Congo, right? We're kind of flashy people. I'm just gonna
please.
I'm just a little flashy.
Just watch Coffee all over there. People
we shouldn't be spending money on flashy stuff, but your clothes is like what lifts you. It's like the thing. And so I was defiant about that, because it was the only thing I could just like do for myself. And also, like, but I get it. And I get it because I got all of that too, right? There's a whole image you have to portray. So
wow. You've been able to unpack so much.
Good.
I
ramble.
No. I'm so grateful. But I want to change the direction to where can people, there's so many people in our community that are undocumented. How can people reach you? I know you have an organization that you support, Stateless and Dreamers.
Yeah,
that's your organization?
Well, so United Stateless, USL, is a stateless organization. I started an organization, Stateless and Dreamers. It's still in its very, I would say, infant stages, because I really wanted to start something that can provide funding for both the communities that I'm part of. I'm both stateless and I was undocumented. And so, dreamers are typically, individuals who are undocumented. But for now, I have my website, IllegalAmongUs.com. So it's like the name of my book title, Illegal Among Us, all one word.com. And if you go there, I do offer like quick tips. So example, here's how you can prepare if you're meeting with your lawyer. These are the 5 things you can do to help, make the meeting more efficient. There are resources that I've listed on like different, attorneys based on, the region of the country. So different things, resources and tools that I'm putting up on the website as resources, because I think the more we know, the better, right? For me, at least. Not everyone wants to know all the nuances of being undocumented, if they are, or being an immigrant. But I do think it's important for us to not just give the power to our lawyers. Our lawyers are not saviors, okay? Lawyers are not, they're not God, they're not saviors, they're not higher power. They're human beings that are fallible, they can make mistakes. And so you can't just, this is the mistake I made. You can't just give your life, your story to lawyer and say, hey, okay, save me, you figure it out. And meanwhile, I'm just going to wait for you to call me. That is not how you succeed. You have to be your own advocate. And so that's really what I try to get my mentees to understand. Like, you advocate for yourself, and this is how you can do it, right? They're little things. I'm not saying you become your own lawyer. No. Yeah. I'm just saying, for example, my lawyer didn't even know that I was eligible for a work authorization card until I figured it out, because I was taking an immigration law course. And in my research, I was like, wait a minute. Yes, I am in deportation proceedings, but apparently I'm still eligible to get a work authorization while I'm in deportation proceedings. This is at the time. I don't know if the laws have changed. Yeah. And I presented that to my lawyer and I said, hey, so-and-so, did you know? He goes, oh, wait, let me look into that. Oh, you're right. So you see what I mean? Like, if we just rely on this one person who's got all these other cases, who's also stressed, who's also probably dealing with mental health, because how depressing is it to watch and hear these hard stories over and over again? Don't just rely on that person. Yeah. Be your own advocate. So that's the kind of information I provide on IllegalAmongUs.com, so that people, can just take the power back a little bit.
I'll have all of your contacts in the show notes. Okay, thank you. Comes out. So you've written a few books. Yes. One of my favorite one is actually DEI. And I have a lot to say on that. This will be another session that we can have on that, because of being an immigrant. Diversity doesn't come that easy as being an immigrant. So that's a topic that I really want to talk on. But I would like for you to share your books and what inspired you to actually write the book, DEI. I know the other one.
Because like I said, I'm not home, I'm traveling, so I didn't think to bring.
Guys, Martine is traveling. I'm so great. She's so gracious to join me, even when she's on the road.
So I don't have my other book, but I'll say the first one, like I said, is Illegal Among Us, a Stateless Woman's Quest for Citizenship. This is my memoir. I wrote this in 2018. It came out in 2018. And it really is an introspective on, the experience of more like the mental health component and experience of being undocumented and stateless, and what a person goes through and their journey. And it also becomes a guide to navigating that. And my second book, which I don't know if you happen to have in front of you, or...
No, I have everything in my phone. So I'll get it right now.
I'm looking to...
in my iBook. Guys, you can get all of her books on I got the book on iBooks. So for everybody who has Apple and also Amazon, you can find her.
Yeah, it's on. So it's I've got this book just came out this year. It's so
we
called
have the
ABCs of Diversity.
Yeah.
Manager's Guide to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the New Workplace. And it's a tool, it's a guidebook. It's really meant to be a primer for organizations, companies that are trying to drive DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's like it's like this term that people use but don't quite understand. Sometimes we use academic jargon when we're trying to explain DEI, and it feels very intimidating for some people. Some people who I would say particularly who are not part of marginalized groups in organizations sometimes feel like, oh, this is not for me, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be shamed or blamed. The problem is the more we do that, the more it's exclusive. It's not going to work. We need everybody's engagement, involvement. And I really believe that the workplace is like a microcosm for affecting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the world. Because if you think about it, everybody goes to work, or most people go to work and have a job, right? And so if we are actually trying to influence and change and create DEI in the workplace, it's going to permeate outside of the workplace, right? Before, we've been trying to do, affect DEI and mitigate racism outside of the workplace, right? And have it permeate into the workplace. But I argue, let's do it this other way around. And then I also more specifically argue or feel that managers should be the prime group that drives us, because they're the largest belt in an organization. They influence, if you think about whether the person's decision to stay or leave a company, it has a lot to do with the experience of the person, their direct manager. So the manager really influences that. They also influence attrition, hiring, promotion decision, compensation decisions. All of these decisions are also connected to bias or not being biased. So it's really important for managers to really understand this. So this book is really a primer. It's meant to be easy to read. There's an
audio also. That's the one I have.
An audiobook at the end of each chapter. There's a little exercise. It's, self-reflection, and then actually something you can do when you go back to work. Like, this is what you can apply. So it feels like if you're in a workshop, a training session.
Yeah.
Very easy to navigate. It's 150 pages. So, that's the work that I do around DEI. DEI is tied. It's a subset of immigration. Immigration is a subset of DEI. I've been doing this work for as long as I can remember. When I was in college and I was going through my own immigration situation, I also decided, right, I wanted to expand on it. So my senior thesis was looking at, I was doing a comparative analysis of Black Sudanese immigrants versus white Bosnian immigrants, right, refugees in the upstate New York. And I was looking to see if there was preferential treatment around one versus the other, because one group was Black, the other group was white. And in terms of assimilation and acculturation, like, how were they able to assimilate and acculturate based on whether they were getting preferential treatment? Because I already understood, like I said, the nuances of immigration. I already understood the nuances of, being Black or being, Muslim, and being undocumented. I understood those nuances, and being able to kind of to get to navigate outside of being undocumented, outside of being stateless, right? There's certain privileges that we have even in our places of dislocation. And so that was really evident to me. So I started to do that work even then. And it just expanded to what I do now, because having navigated through the corporate world in the business sector, you see.
I'm curious. I want to know, was there any preferential treatment?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because there are biases that that were carried in the local. I mean, this was in the local upstate community in Utica, back in the early 2000s. Remember, there was a war in South Sudan. There was also a war, in Bosnia. And so this was both groups of refugees came to that local upstate community. They were brought in by the Lutheran Church. And so, they were both, expected and to assimilate, acculturate, right? Immerse themselves. So I conducted field study. I went into their homes just to see and hear, what are your experiences in the local community? right? Are you, when you're looking for a job, or when you're looking for housing, an apartment,
Yeah.
how easy is it for you, you versus you, and so I already knew that those were some of the nuances that live and exist within immigration. And we see that, like I said, we look at how the media portrays one group of, refugees versus another group, right?
Yeah.
The way that, you know, migrant workers from Mexico are portrayed versus, someone, a refugee from somewhere in Europe. How are they portrayed, right? So we see all of this.
You
This is
just
not,
reminded me of something when you talked about housing, because when I was looking for housing,
yeah,
a lot of people trust Africans. They'll tell me straight in my face, oh, we like Africans. We like to rent to Africans because they work hard. They're going to pay rent on time. And I'm just like, wow, this is
yeah,
crazy. That,
right. But, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's good for me, but how about the rest of my community?
Well, how about that? And also at the same time that they say that, I mean, there's a lot of, it's like a backhanded compliment, right? There's a whole lot
It is.
attached to that. And at the same
Trust me,
time
I
that,
know.
and if they're so comfortable saying that about you, that compliment, they're also probably comfortable saying something else about Africans, right? Like
Of course.
that isn't so complimentary.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? And you're absolutely right. So how is housing determined? How is all this determined, right? Those are things that, I mean, we see this not just in the immigrant community. That's just a microcosm of DEI. We see it outside, right? We see how housing, couples, Black couples, trying to sell a home have a lot of, are less likely they'll get it. They'll sell it
A higher price.
a lower price than if,
Yeah.
they're a white couple. And, we see mixed race couples, they have to make sure that the person who's not white is not in the house, or, just make sure there aren't any, any indications that any person is Black in the house. I mean, so we see this. I mean, it's absolutely devastating, but it permeates into the workplace, right? It permeates and it affects people's their career mobility. All of this it sits within the guise of bias, microaggressions. It all affects somebody's career mobility. And what does career mobility do? It affects somebody's money, right? The way that they can grow and make money. And how does money affects a person's social mobility, economic mobility. So it's all connected. So for me, it's a matter of, well, what can be done in the workplace? And, because I spent much of my career in human resources, in a human resources capacity, I work primarily with human resources executives to empower them, to equip them to do this work. Because a lot of times right now, DEI, like companies are like, oh, we got to do DEI so we can get our employees off our back, or let's be part of the bandwagon. And then they sort of dump it on the HR person, right? And the HR person is not experienced. They already have a whole lot of work on that they're doing. They just feel like, it feels like they got all this extra work dumped on them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so how do we change that? How do we empower them? How do we get them to position DEI as a business structure within an organization that actually can help grow the organization, as opposed to just like this idea of it being like charity? Oh, let's do DEI because it's the right thing to do. Beyond it being the right thing to do, it's like the smart thing to do. It's going to grow the business.
It is. I've been in my career for a while, and sometimes I was approached by other banks for me just to be in an area where I'm able to serve that area, because it's the Black community. They're not able to reach that community because they call it the wrong person representing.
Right.
But then they need somebody Black enough that the community can relate to.
Representation. Yeah.
So I'm just like, okay.
But the key is that so that's the kind of work that I do with DI, because it's great that they brought you in, right? And you're able to represent. So then you're attracting more clientele. But your experience has to also be one in which you want to stay, right? Because you might be bringing in clientele. However, you might be, I'm just hypothetically just sharing what I've seen. However, the person next to you, your colleague who started at the same time you did, they're being promoted. They got promoted twice and you're still in the same position, right? Hypothetically speaking. Well, then at some point you're going to start to wonder, well, what the heck's going on, right? So that's the kind of work that needs to be done or undone and understood, because there are biases in performance reviews, performance evaluations, right? Studies show that, people of color and women, they're rated based on their personality in performance reviews, whereas white men are rated based on their actual performance, right? And they're usually the tropes and stereotypes that perpetuate how, what those ratings are, and the comments that are given. Oh, she's a little aggressive, things like that. So that's what we want to unpack, right? Because it makes a whole world of difference. So there's so many layers of DEI.
I love what you're doing. I love the book. Me being a leader, it's something that I have to take with me, even to work. Like, just aside from, I feel as though I was born a leader. That's what I call it. I'm like, I'm a firstborn in my family. I had so much responsibility from the time I was young. I take care of too much. And then nobody really teaches you like how to be that great leader. It's at the end of the day, they can give you so much training. It's up to the individual to actually utilize what you are learning to give to your team. So when I was listening to your to ABC, I'm like, wow, this is really insightful.
It's
But they do give us training, but not to this perspective.
Well, having been I've run learning and development departments for many years now on a global scale. What you do learn, like you said, the learning, you don't want a training culture, you want a learning culture. A training culture is people go into a training room and they go, okay, trainer, tell me what I need to know. And now you're, make magic so I retain it. That's just not how adults learn. A learning community is where peer-to-peer learning happens, and learning really happens outside of the training rooms, right? Like, it's when you apply what you learn 100%. And it works or it doesn't work. And then you go back and you try to figure out why it didn't work. And then you try it again. That is what, that's really what I felt was most important in this book, like to allow people to take just a little bit of what I said in, the first chapter, second chapter, try it, see if it works, and then build off of that. That's how people learn. That's like, if you have a really effective manager development program, that's what it should include. Right?
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. I encourage anybody who's looking to be a leader, who is in leadership already, to grab the book. And for us immigrants, let's take the guide, IllegalAmong Us. I love it. I love what you're doing. I appreciate you for pouring into our community. Your story
thank you for having me.
So inspiring. So many of us are learning from this story. I have so much takeaways. There's so many people in the world that are going to be like eye-opening type of conversation that we've just had. How can people find you on social media? And how can we support everything else aside from the books? What else are you working on that we can support you?
You can find me by going to either my website. So martinekalaw.com is probably the first place you can go. It's really focused on DEI, but anything related to immigration, there is a link, right, to illegalamongus.com. So go to either website. You'll see my social media handles there. I say just go to the website, you see the social media handles, you can click on them. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And I think just the most important thing is tune in to like I said, go to my immigration website if you're looking for any resources. These are resources, best practices that I developed in interacting and talking to immigration lawyers, right? And talking to and understanding the community and what they're challenged with these days. Reach out if you have any questions. You know, my contact information is on both of my websites.
Nice.
Yeah.
At this point, you've been through ups and downs, and now you are where you are today. Do you feel you found your concrete pastures?
Have I found my concrete pastures? You know what? I'm on a journey. I would say that I'm building my concrete pastures.
Yeah,
I'm
nice.
building it. So I'm creating each stone by stone, brick by brick. And I like that, right? Because I really
Right.
feel like you know, I feel very like I have agency in that. And so I feel good about that. And I've built quite a bit. There's more to do.
Nice.
Yeah.
Listen, you're giving so much to the community, and we are here to support you throughout your journey and how you are building your concrete pastures. We are here to support you.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you, Nick.
Last question: what motivates you? Do you have any quote that you live by? I'm inspired by so many people. You've inspired me. You are now on the list.
Thank you. I would say my favorite quote, if I were in my office at you know, my home, I would just pull it up, but it's on a card. It's by Albert Einstein. I can't, you know, quite synthesize it the way he does, but it really goes something along the lines of, you know, either everything in life is a miracle or nothing is a miracle. You get to choose. And that's what inspires me. This is how I make a choice every day, how I'm going to show up in life, you know, just being grateful and seeing everything with wonder. Or, you know, just focusing on, you know, the downs that I've had and, you know, emphasizing those. So it's a choice at the end of the day. And so, you know, that's one. And then the other that I also like, that's kind of along the same lines is, you know, in life, you know, we all get a chance to write our life story as a comedy, a tragedy, or a horror, right? We also get to choose that, right? And so anytime our stories of tragedy, lots of tragic stories out there, and our stories could be tragic, just look back and think, well, if I were going to turn this into a comedy, how would I? Right? That's really, really hard to do. But I've done that.
I like that. I like that because it's so easy to focus on, oh, look at what happened to me. Look at it. At least when you look back and like, okay, how can I make this into a comedy? Something I can look back and laugh at it. I'm like, oh my God, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's pretty cool if you
you,
can
my
do
dear,
that.
have been amazing. I'm
Thank you so
so
much,
happy
Nancy.
you've been able to be here today.
Thank
Oh my
you for your
God.
time. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for contributing. And I hope we have you back for
Absolutely.
DEI.
Anytime.
Because there's so many immigrant leaders out there. We all need to learn how to be great leaders. All right.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.